Good evening. It is Wednesday, February 20th, 2019. It's about 8:31 p.m. Central Standard Time. Welcome to week number 8 of Introduction to Corrections. And I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I'm going to spend roughly the next hour or so going over the assignment for the next week, for this week coming up. Then I will mention what's going to happen week 9, because there won't be a lecture during week 9. And in fact, there will be just one more lecture that takes place week 10. So I am going to open up and share my screen. Okay, as you can see, you see the course homepage, which you all are familiar with. And so I'm going to just scroll down to remind you that rubrics are in each written assignments and course projects. And then this is the discussion post, and reminding you that there will be one more lecture week 10. That's it. And then these are the recordings for each of the weeks. Open house week 1, week 2, week 4, week 6, and then under this will be week 8 at the conclusion of this session. Okay. And so now here is the week 8 announcement. This week we're going to talk about parole. And I sent you the PowerPoints for sections 7, 8, and 9 of your text corrections. And we're going to go over defining what parole is, its issues, and then we're going to conclude with a conversation with a parole officer. I'm going to attempt to put that recording on with my headphones off, because you won't be able to hear. If it's not very clear, then you can go back and you can look at the conversation on your own. But it explains some things about becoming a parole officer that you need to be aware of, because there are several of you in this class whose goal is to become a parole or probation officer. And we'll discuss the difference in the two. So remember your discussion assignment, parole violations and the officer's role. Of course, your initial post was due on Tuesday. Your reply post will be due this Saturday. And I encourage you to reply to more than one post. To maximize your points, get your post in on time and provide details. I welcome citations and references, but they're not required. Finally, why parolees fail and what can be done. So you want to complete that written assignment, and we'll go over that with the written rubric. And then the last thing is your quiz, and that quiz is a timed quiz. And then you already know what my motto, adversity is the springboard to success, is all about. So I won't elaborate on that, because you heard the open house, or could still go back and hear it. So let's go look at our course calendar. Course calendar will tell you everything that you need to know. Right here is where we are. You see what your reading assignment was at the beginning of the week, and there it is there. It's also in the module. Your initial post, click on that. And I told you what that is, and that was due yesterday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, the live lecture, which also gives you the link again. That's another place you can find the link to the classroom. And then your reply post due Saturday. And then finally, your written assignment and then your quiz are both due Sunday the 24th, okay? And then next week, you have a reading assignment, initial post, same thing, and then a reply post, and then on the 3rd, we are in March then, you have your written assignment, and then you finish your course project, okay, and that will complete week 9. So you can submit your final course project in week 9. And we're going to talk about the details on that, so you can make sure that you do what you're supposed to do there. All right. So now let's go into the module. Again, your written assignment is, it says research why parolees fail, two-page paper, double space, and explain 2 or 3 of the top reasons and what can be done to assist parolees in becoming successful. Remember your spelling, your APA, run your papers through Grammarly, and there's the online library, which is available through Resources tab, but it also is on your course homepage as well to help you with your research. And so you know how to submit your assignments. Here is the rubric coming up through Sunday, and heavily grade your papers based on the rubric. You'll get 15 points if you provide this information in a 2-page paper, 2 or 3 of the top reasons, and then paragraphs, well written, double space, APA. We already know about APA. We've gone over that over and over and over again. Many of you lose points because you don't do APA properly. There's a video that's available. There's a guide that's in the course that's available to you to help you. And then never use unreliable sources like Wikipedia and those. So you'll get 25 points for that, getting that assignment in on time. Then your discussion posts, and then of course your timed quiz, and contains 10 multiple choice questions, and you want to make sure you abide by the academic misconduct policy, not having information in front of you when you do this. And that's due on Sunday as well. All right. You already know when your discussion posts are due. We already went over that. All right. So let's go back and let's look at the lesson content where we're going to spend the rest of our time. So we're going to talk about what parole is all about. Your reading, again, I gave you that. So we're going to define parole, and then we're going to conclude with a conversation with a parole officer. Make sure you complete these assignments. Of course, you know, reach out to me if you have any questions. Again, I want to go back to the course homepage just for a minute and remind you that you can get information and help regarding APA by going to the Resources tab. Here it is right there. Click on it, and it gives you online resources. There's an APA guide which helps you. If you click on that, that helps you with dealing with APA. Very, very, very important. If you don't take the time to get that done, very, very, very important. Okay? And then all you gotta do is do this. Click on it, and it opens it up. It gives you a toolkit, and it gives you templates for Word, tells you how to use it. It's everything you need to know. Noodle tools to help you build your APA references and in-text citations. You don't have to worry about annotated bibliography. There's a video here that helps you as well. So you want to use these tools to help you There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to understand APA. You've gone to great lengths. If you still have a problem, let me know. I'll refer you out for tutoring. And then this right here, it's worth it because it transfers over into other classes as well. So then you got your Grammarly, you know about that. Make sure that you check plagiarism, and then your Noodle Tools and your writing guide. And then these are, you can research by topic and subject. There's a place where there's a webinar series that can help you as well. So the key thing is that you want to make sure that you utilize these resources, because these resources will help you to become successful. Students ignore them and don't use them, and that's one of the problems that students end up having and why their grades are lower than they need to be. So, going back about the topic of parole. So here's the deal. First of all, let me say right off the bat that of the areas that are involved with corrections, jails, prisons, probation, or parole, jails and probation go together. And probation means that you don't go to jail, you're not incarcerated, but you're allowed to serve your time outside, basically under supervision of what we call a probation officer. And you don't go into the penitentiary or jail unless you violate one of the conditions of that. On the other hand, parole is you go to the penitentiary, which means that you committed a felony and you're sentenced to the penitentiary, and after you've spent a certain period of time, depending on the jurisdiction you're in, then you're given the opportunity to serve the rest of your time under the supervision of not a probation officer, but a parole officer. Some states like Illinois doesn't use that term, they use mandatory supervised release. But the idea is that when you are in prison and you are released, that you remain under the supervision of someone who can help you with job opportunities, who can help you with education, who can point you in the direction for housing, if you have a drug problem, to continue to make sure that you satisfy the requirements that are necessary to help you deal with your drug issues. Same thing with DUIs or dealing with alcohol issues as well. And so if you do not violate those terms, then you are allowed to finish your time outside of jail. Okay? So for all practical purposes, when we're dealing with parole, you are put back into the community, and the parole officer or parole agent is someone who is like the person who holds you accountable. And the idea is to help you to not become a recidivist, but to help you to transition into living a life where you are not committing crimes anymore, and to address issues that are necessary to help you. Now, you have to remember this. In order for a parolee to be successful, first of all, number one, the system decides a parole board, which is a series of individuals who listen to reasons why you should be given early release. One of the most publicized parole hearings happened either last year or year before, was O.J. Simpson, when he was paroled from prison. And the hearing usually takes place where there are individuals who are victims, there are people who can testify as to how you were while you were in prison, maybe the warden or someone on behalf of the warden. And sometimes there is the prosecutor who will be there to generally indicate why you should not receive parole. But there are rare instances where the prosecutor is not involved because it's not an issue, and that you have been a model prisoner, and that it is deemed that you learned your lesson that you while you were incarcerated, and that it's time to help you to get your life back on track. Now, when you are released, there are conditions that are given. One of the conditions generally is no alcohol, no drugs, you don't hang around felons, which can be a problem in some instances with people, because sometimes the only people that they know are felons, or even some of the family members that they are around are felons. So it's a problem. But you know why that is? Because people have a tendency to operate on the basis of their environment. And if you're living in a situation where you're around individuals who are criminals, it increases the likelihood that you will commit a crime, which would result in what we call a VOP, violation of parole, and you will be brought back to the board, and the parole officer will file a petition, and if they revoke it, they will send you to penitentiary to serve the rest of your time. Now, if you also caught a case that's outside, not only will you violate the parole rather, but then whatever time that needs to be added on for conviction for the crime. Now, be aware that the parole hearings don't operate the same way as criminal cases do. Criminal cases, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. But in probation and parole hearings, the standard is preponderance of evidence. So it's almost like a civil case. So the parole officer's job is not to take minor infractions and send you back. For example, it is quite frequently that an individual will violate because their drug problem or alcohol problem hadn't been adequately addressed. Now, remember, with those kind of situations, the individual who participates in those programs has to, one, admit they have a problem, number two, be willing to subject themselves to all the policies and procedures to help them to, as they say, get the monkey off of their back so that they can live a productive life. And so the parole officer's role is to help you to do that. And so with your reporting to the parole officer, they will make sure that you have satisfied the conditions of parole, and that will remain until the balance of your sentence has been completed. Okay. Again, the goal is not to send a person back for a minor infraction or offense, and it's generally held that individuals who do violate don't violate on purpose. In other words, not thumbing their nose at the whole process, because unfortunately what has happened is that many individuals who are placed on parole are placed in situations where they don't have the adequate resources to help them to deal with the issues that put them in prison in the first place. And so if you're going to release a person on parole and you haven't addressed the drug problem, alcohol problem, as soon as they get out, what are they going to do? They're going to violate. They're going to go to drugs. They're going to go to alcohol. They will probably commit crimes that will cause them to catch a case to support those habits. So it is very important. Some will education, because it is quite clear that if you take a person and give them some education, they can turn their life around and move away from crime. There are exceptions, of course, to it, but the fact of the matter is it is cheaper to educate than to continue to incarcerate. I think overall it's better for society to educate because of the fact that prisons are overcrowded, and when a person is in an overcrowded environment, they become more frustrated. They're eventually going to come out, and then they're going to be probably worse than they were when they went in. And so parole is either discretionary in what we call indeterminate sentencing, or it's mandatory. So when it's discretionary, it's at the discretion of the board after you complete so much, and they'll determine whether or not you meet the criteria. If it's mandatory, if you satisfy the requirements and have performed well during that period, then you will be granted parole, because then it's based on determinate sentencing, because you completed whatever the required percentage by law or statute in the jurisdiction is, and you qualify for parole. But in either one, you're still going to be under the same rules and regulations that I previously discussed. And so the board, as I said, determines who and when discretionary parole is granted, and the board also is the one who you deal with when it comes to revoking the parole. And it's a privilege. It's not a right, just like they said, similar to probation. And you are entitled, if you could deal with a violation or have a revocation or BOP, to due process, which means you have a right to be represented. You have a right to the details of why you're being violated, and a right to respond to determine if there's any possible way, either that you did not violate, or if you did violate, that you provide a reason that makes sense to everybody, and that it wasn't intentionally done, and that there was something they may need to add to the sentence, or not to the sentence, but to your conditions that will help you to be successful. And so those things are due process rights. A parole officer, anyway, has the same kind of jobs, as I already said, a probation officer, dealing with the rules, and try to reintegrate that person into the society or community. You could have intensive supervision, or you could have a GPS on you, depending on the situation, other methods of surveillance, and then, as I said earlier, they get some assistance with employment, education, skills, treatment for counseling, and then deal with other family issues. The idea is to point that person in a positive direction in life, to take them away from what they were accustomed to being caught up in. So parolees, as they say, fail because, again, they don't have adequate resources, or sometimes the individual's need is not met, and that applies to both parole and probation. And with a strong support program, both probation and parole can result in successful parolees. I've seen both. I've seen violators. I've seen successful people go in a totally different direction. And all the things that I pointed out earlier go with that in terms of family and all those things. And so that's it for parole and how it operates. I will say this to you so you understand. Remember, the goal of the criminal justice system ought to be to rehabilitate. And this is what parole is an attempt to do, is to rehabilitate the individual and to give them a new direction in life. Not a 360, because that takes you back around, but more like, I like to say, a 180, which totally takes them in the opposite direction. Sometimes they have to have new friends, a totally new environment, but a strong support staff from the parole officer to the programs are important to a successful parolee. Okay? So now you understand how that works. So now I'm going to take off my headphones so that you can hear. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the conversation with the parole officer. Listen very carefully. It's about 15 minutes long. But listen very carefully to some of the requirements that they say you need. Number one requirement is you cannot become a parole officer without a bachelor's degree. You cannot do it with an associate's. You have to have at least a bachelor's. It is not a desk job. It is a job where your car is actually your office, and you have a computer in there, and you're on the road, and you're meeting the individual at various places, various times. The key thing is that sometimes you can resort to becoming a bounty hunter when there's some violations, and you have to determine which way to operate. Now, you also have to be very ethical and very strong, because you don't want to get yourself in a position where someone's able to buy you off and to get something because they bought you off. So let's take a look at this right now.
My name is Lance Culver with the Minnesota Department of Corrections. I started with the Department of Corrections in 1995. I started as a probation officer, working with adult misdemeanors and juvenile at all levels, misdemeanor, felons, whatnot. Did that position for many years before becoming a supervised release probation officer, working mainly with adults, solely with adults. Did that for many years before I took the current position that I'm working in now as the supervised release agent and CIP agent, which is the Challenge Incarceration Program.
And both programs are the equivalency of parole. These people have been to prison and are serving the remainder of their prison sentence in the community.
That is correct. All the clients that I've worked with have been sentenced to prison, have served their immediate time in prison, have been released on their remaining third of supervision in the community. However, on the CIP program, or Challenge Incarceration Boot Camp program, those individuals are released early as inmates still living in the community working off their prison sentence.
Okay. Okay. So what does that mean, that you get everybody who comes out of prison?
When an individual is sentenced in the court system to prison, those individuals that go to prison are evaluated at the institution to determine their risk to the public. If their risk score reaches a certain level, they are assigned to an intensive supervised release team. I am a part of that team that supervised some of the more risky cases in the state of Minnesota. Those would be cases of murder, possibly all sex offenders that are of significant risk to public safety, and level 3 sex offenders, level 2 sex offenders, but not necessarily all sex offenders are considered a risk to public safety. I'm also a CIP agent. CIP stands for Challenge Incarceration Program. We handle the individuals that come out of the Minnesota's Working Over Boot Camp. And so we have a boot camp system for early releasees who have met the criteria for early release.
But they have gone to prison in order to participate in this boot camp.
That's correct. I am a supervised release agent now. My primary, I work mainly and only with individuals who are released from prisons.
Okay, what are the qualifications to do your position?
The qualifications to be what's called a corrections agent are a 4-year degree in corrections or an equivalent background such as sociology, psychology, Also, an internship of 400 hours or equivalent work, such as including pre-sentence investigations, case management. You might look at other types of employment, such as case manager within the institution, and other case management type jobs within the community, in other social work type jobs in the state.
Is there a typical day for you?
Yes. Some days are very typical. You wake up, you get dressed, you check your vehicle, because all of our contacts, all of our work is in the community. We operate out of, as an intensive supervised release agent, we work out of the car. The car is set up like an office. It has a laptop. It looks like a lot like a squad car. We review the previous days, or from the last time you worked, current notes that were inputted on all clients. I have sometimes, a lot of times, a to-do list that never seems to go away, and just gets longer and longer each day. Review that, and then basically start setting up a contact list of the people I'm going to see for that day. Then load up my car, check my vehicle before I leave, and then head out onto the road.
So once you're on the road, are visits typical home, because you're at their home, correct?
In their homes, workplaces, and any place that they talk to an agent about frequenting. Could be a community service site, could be a support group meeting.
Okay. So what might happen at a visit?
In a typical home contact, an agent will head into the residence, do a brief walk through the residence to make sure that everything is status quo, that there's nothing out of the ordinary going on. Once that has been established, we start to work on basically the housekeeping things. What conditions have you met to this point? The standard conditions, a lot of our people have to do community service, treatment, things like that. Discuss those housekeeping things. And then we start looking at case management, looking at the things that the clients are interested in, looking at some of their high-risk needs and areas, and start addressing some of those needs and start planning for the future in hopes of addressing some of the problems they've had in the past in order to prevent those from being problems in the future.
Okay, so are there ever, like, violation issues or safety issues for you?
Absolutely. Every day is a safety issue, not only for us within the home of our clients, their peers and associates within the home, but also for us, and for a lot of people, might be people from the immediate surroundings of the community. I happen to spend a lot of time in North Minneapolis, which I think a lot of people are aware is a very significant area for violence. So you always have to have situational awareness in regards to what's going on around you. We are trained in agent safety training courses in order to prevent or to reduce the incidence of safety issues with agents. You're not putting yourself in a position where a client has you locked in, de-escalation skills. In terms of if something's going south, if something's starting to look bad, you're able to work that through in a manner that de-escalates the problem down to hopefully little or nothing.
Okay. We've talked about release of offenders and some of the barriers and issues that they face. Do you see that with the population you work with?
Yes. These individuals have gone to prison with not much care to their lives. They don't have 401k plans. They don't have retirement plans. They haven't had, some of them never even worked a job for any length of time whatsoever. And so when they're released, those are tremendous obstacles that need to be overcome. Within the institution, there are programs developed for those things, interviewing skills, job training programs within the institution. So some of that is had within the institution. The biggest problem is housing. They burned a lot of bridges going into the institution, and so bridges meaning family. They burned up their family members. They burned up their friends, and so when they're released, they have nothing, no one. And a lot of times they'll come up here from another state and commit a crime. And so really, they're stuck. They have nowhere to go, nothing to do. So housing is a big issue, employment is a big issue, but that's for everybody.
Okay, and so you work with them on those issues. You help with those issues also?
I do. Not necessarily directly with the clients in regards to their individual housing needs, but we are always in search of offender housing in the areas that we supervise. That is one of our mission statements. That's one of our goals as agents, is to find suitable housing for clients that we can use on a regular basis for those individuals who don't otherwise have housing in the community. There are a lot of programs out there, especially in the metro areas, that are willing to rent to help.
Okay. Touched on violations earlier, but we've talked about the violation process, and it's a little bit different than going to court. Can you talk about the hearing process and maybe your role as an agent during that process?
An agent plays a dual role in that process. Although an agent's in the home working with the client to assist them in their facilitation of a better life, when it comes to a violation, in a hearing, an agent becomes a prosecutor. And in that the hearing is set up typically at jails. So let's start from the beginning. If an agent comes into a situation and the client is found to be in a violation situation, an ISR agent does carry handcuffs, and at that point makes the determination as to whether or not they're going to place that person in custody. They can do it themselves, or they can call for backup from local law enforcement, which is always advised. In most situations, as an ISR agent, I tend to work the situation myself, because that's not been too much of a problem for me so far. But anyway, when the violation occurs, the client is placed in custody. A warrant is issued for their arrest through the officer of the day. That is placed in I typically transport the client to the local jail. At that point, we establish a report based on that violation and any other violation that may be out there. That report is submitted to Minnesota, the Department of Corrections Hearings and Release Unit and the State Public Defender's Office. A hearing is scheduled, and those three parties come together: the client, the Hearings and Release Officer, and the Public Defender. The agent is also there and acts as the prosecutor, or the prosecutor. They present the evidence to show that the client has violated their conditions of release. The defense attorney, of course, defends the client, and then the hearing officer weighs the decision to determine whether or not there has been a preponderance of evidence to show that that client has violated their condition of release, and if they have, whether or not the violation is sufficient enough to send them back to the institution, restructure them, or dismiss. Restructure would be adding new conditions, addressing the fact that there was a violation, finding that there is a suitable cause to put either accountability in place or to put other aspects into place, such as a client using drugs may be considered for a evaluation and possible further treatment programming to assist them in that behavior.
So sometimes intermediate sanctions can be used instead of reincarceration.
Intermediate sanctions are agents will have at their disposal in the field, and what they'll do is it acts like a revocation within the institution, but without the hearing officers. The agent will ask the client if they're willing to participate in this program, and then at that point the client may be willing to engage in those things that we talked about in the restructure, such as further chemical dependency programming, an intermediate sanction that would be a loss of privileges, may even voluntarily go on to an electronic monitor to address accountability issues.
Okay. And you mentioned a hearing officer. Is that like a parole board in other states?
It would be like, I think a parole board would be set up more in a factor of having multiple individuals at a table evaluating a person's adjustment to be released from the institution. I think it's more like a judge. in this particular case. I would equate it more to the judge's role. They weighed both sides of the evidence from the defense attorney lays out their side of the story, the client lays out his information, and then the probation officer, parole officer, ISR agent lays out their violation. The hearing officer slash what I would consider the judge takes all that information in and determines whether or not that person is in violation or not.
Okay.
And the sanction is a resolution comes after that from that hearing officer slash judge.
Okay.
It's an administrative position.
Okay.
It's called an administrative hearing.
Okay. Do you have advice for students today who are interested in this field?
This is, as everybody knows, the community, the state is suffering significant losses in revenue, and jobs are hard to find in any field. My best advice for people who are coming in the field is volunteer. Get into the agencies, do pre-sentence investigations, do case management, work with kids, get to know people in the field. Once you're in the field, have a good idea of what it is that you want to do in the field, and be an innovator. I think 20 years from now, it might not look the same way it did 20 years ago. So I suspect what we're going to be looking at is technology, how they can bring that to the forefront, how those individuals coming into the field can be an asset to that agency, not necessarily somebody who wants to sit behind the desk all day or who wants to just collect a paycheck to do a job so that they can, and collect a paycheck to do the job to do what they want to do elsewhere. It's those who really love the job and really bring something to that agency that are really going to make a difference in how we see corrections in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Very, very, very good information. Notice, as I said earlier, that this is not a desk job, and that also, you know, you're talking about the intermediate sanctions. That's when it's like like the way we do in our courses as professors, we can correct issues with you students, but then if it gets serious, then we pass it on to your dean and then to the higher individuals, a panel of deans from that particular point. Then we deal with misconduct. Well, that's the same kind of thing he's saying, is that the parole officer has the opportunity to address the issue and correct it by providing additional things. The goal is to, again, help the individual to become a successful individual in terms of the sentence, all right, to become a successful parolee. All right, so I'm going to conclude by going to Module 9, since we don't have a lecture next week, and I just want to talk about, just very briefly, your written assignments. You see the written assignment, challenges is a mental illness, 2-page paper, and then you're going to deal with these issues, again, APA, once again, and then here's a program that you can take time and go look at, and it will help you deal with that, as well as some other research in your discussion post. But what I wanted to focus on is remind you that your final project paper will be due in week 9. And remember what I told you earlier. I said that your final paper should consist of your weeks 2, your weeks 4, and your week 7. I'm grading week 7 this week, and I'll have that completed so that you'll have it in plenty of time for your final paper. You incorporate that. I recommend having captions for each of those weeks. You don't have to say week 2, but the topic that's there, such as agency and so forth, and then background information is another section, and then the third section is an interview. Make sure you have citations in the body of the paper and references at the end. I already had indicated that with your week 7 that it was just the interview, and the 5 questions that were found in week 1 in the open house and in module 1 about the course project, along with 3 questions of your own, giving detailed information. You do not have to have references for that. You just have the citations concerning the individual that you interviewed to get the information. So now for the final project, you're going to provide all this information that you previously gathered, as I said. Then you're going to also add research from your findings, a minimum of 3 scholarly sources, and it's covered in the week 1 assignment, and focuses on the challenges and solutions. And so the idea is to help you understand the challenges and solutions in the area that you chose. And you conclude your recommendations based on the stuff you learned from your research and interview. And this will give you a chance to, again, continue with your transferable skills that we've been talking about. So the key thing is that you got to make sure that you provide, in addition to the information that you had earlier, incorporate research and provide that. And want to go back to Module 1, Introduction to Project and Field Visit, to review it again to make sure. And just so that you know, I'll take you back just to show you. Go to Module 1, go to Lesson Content, go scroll all the way down, scroll all the way down to Introduction to Course Project, and it tells you the due dates. So your final submission, it tells you you did your interview already, you have your agency, and then you're going to make sure that you've provided this in your overview, and then this is your interview, and then of course you selected the agency earlier, and then you're going to make sure that you follow APA research. Remember, a minimum of 3 resources: a book, a journal article, a website, in addition to your interview. That's in your APA in-text citation and reference pages. All right? And that's it. So you find it all right here so you can make sure. All right? So this is basically your week 7 assignment. This is basically your week 4 assignment. And then you incorporate all of that to for your week 9 assignment, in addition to providing your agency and contact person as information. And that's it. That is it. Okay? So that should help you get your assignment in on time for the course project. All right? And I'm going to terminate this session at this time, and I'm going to say good night. I will be sending the recording out. Make sure that, well, shouldn't say that here. You make sure you listen to the recording, because you will listen to it if you hear me say that. So I'm going to say good night.